What if one of the most famous supernatural legends in history was never about ghosts or magic, but about fear, greed, and timing? What if everything you think you know about the so-called mummy curse was built on half-truths, sensational headlines, and a few very convenient deaths? Stay with me, and by the end you will see why this legend survived for more than a century, even though the evidence behind it crumbles like ancient linen. Picture the moment that sparked it all. It is 1922 in the Valley of the Kings in Egypt, and a team of excavators led by Howard Carter breaks through a sealed doorway for the first time in more than 3,000 years. A flicker of lamplight reveals golden shrines, wooden chests, ebony statues, and something no one believed would ever be found again, an untouched royal tomb. The world explodes with headlines because the name rumored to lie within is Tutankhamun. Within weeks, newspapers across Europe and America are printing feverish stories about ancient warnings, curses etched into walls, and vengeful spirits waiting to punish anyone who disturbs the dead. And then someone actually dies. George Herbert, the 5th Earl of Carnarvon. The financial backer of the excavation falls ill shortly after the tomb is opened. He is bitten by a mosquito, then cuts the same spot while shaving and develops a fatal infection. Newspapers call it punishment from the afterlife. Journalists write that a warning was found on the wall. They claim it said something like, "Death shall come on swift wings to those who disturb the king." Yet here is the twist. No such inscription existed. It was entirely invented by the press and repeated until people remembered it as fact. The death of Lord Carnarvon becomes the spark that ignites the myth. Soon anyone remotely connected to the discovery is accused of being next on the cursed list. A dozen newspapers scramble to tie every unrelated death to the tomb. A friend of Carnarvon dies of pneumonia months later. Someone else unrelated collapses in Cairo. A man with heart problems passes away in London. A bird owned by Carter is said to have been eaten by a cobra, and even that gets presented as an omen. But reality refuses to cooperate with the headlines. Howard Carter himself, the man who literally opened the tomb, lived another 16 years. He died of natural causes in his 60s, having experienced zero supernatural consequences for defying the gods. So where did the curse idea really come from? The answer lies before Tutankhamun was even discovered. European fascination with ancient Egypt was already obsessed with the supernatural. In the 19th century, wealthy travelers bought mummies at auctions, held unwrapping parties in their parlors, and whispered that these preserved bodies carried spiritual power. When something bad happened after someone purchased a mummy, it was easier to blame a curse than ask other questions. Long before Carter or Carnarvon walked into a tomb, people were primed to believe that ancient Egyptians had magical defenses protecting their dead. Here is another overlooked piece of the puzzle. The time when Tutankhamun was discovered was also the time when newspapers were fighting fiercely for attention. Reporters exaggerated facts or invented them without hesitation if it sold papers. They printed shocking claims that archaeologists were hiding dangerous discoveries. They pushed the idea that curses were real because it sold faster than any careful explanation. A journalist in London literally wrote the first curse headline the day after Carnarvon died, and other outlets copied it instantly. Almost none of them bothered to ask archaeologists directly, "Let us talk about the tomb itself." There were no magical inscriptions warning intruders to stay away. No wall markings that threatened death. There were protective prayers meant to shield the deceased, not attack outsiders. Egyptians believed in safeguarding the soul, but this protection was aimed at keeping evil away, not sending it out. They used spells from the Book of the Dead, but those texts guided spirits peacefully through the afterlife. They were not horror movie scripts, and no part of Tutankhamun's burial chamber contains anything resembling a threat. So if there was no written curse, why did people get sick? Some scientists believe there may have been harmful bacteria mold or ancient toxins sealed inside the tomb for centuries. When a sealed space is opened, spores and pathogens can enter the air. Modern studies show that some tombs contain fungi that trigger respiratory illness, especially in people with weakened immune systems. Lord Carnarvon had already been sick earlier that year. He was not cursed by a god, he was vulnerable to infection and was far from proper medical help when he needed it. But headlines do not care about medical accuracy. They care about selling drama. The myth only gained strength as more people repeated it. Hollywood loved it. The mummy became a story archetype, and soon film and fiction portrayed ancient curses as real forces. When enough people hear a story long enough, the legend swallows the facts. Whole generations grew up believing ancient Egyptians cursed their tombs and murdered intruders through magic, and because no one bothered to explain the truth, simply, the superstition persisted. There is another reason the myth thrived. Western writers often exoticized Egypt, presenting it as a land of occult power, hidden secrets, and dark magic. Instead of respecting its scientific and architectural achievements, they leaned into fear and mystery. This made it easy to turn any death into evidence of a curse. People wanted to be spooked, and newspapers gave them exactly that. Egypt became a stage for fantasy instead of history, and that fantasy spread across continents. Want proof that the curse never held power? Look at the numbers. More than 50 people were closely involved with the excavation and cataloguing of Tutankhamun's tomb. The vast majority lived long, healthy lives. Lady Evelyn Herbert, the first woman to enter the tomb, died at 79. Harry Burton, the photographer who entered daily with heavy equipment, lived into his 70s. Doctors, draftsmen, workers, and museum staff who handled the artifacts for decades never suffered mysterious deaths. The curse only seemed to strike those whose names sold newspapers. Even more telling, ancient Egyptians themselves did not use the word curse in the way we imagine it. Today, curse suggests a deliberate supernatural attack, but in ancient belief systems, their focus was preservation, not revenge. The offerings placed with the dead were to protect and nourish them, not weaponize their tombs. Tombs were sacred spaces like shrines or temples, not booby traps. Only modern imagination turned them into haunted chambers filled with wrathful kings. Let us address one more myth. Some people insist hieroglyphic warnings were erased or hidden by museums to downplay the danger. That myth is pure invention. Archaeologists document everything obsessively, not only the artifacts but the inscriptions around them. The tomb of Tutankhamun has been studied, photographed, and scanned extensively over the last century. Every inch is catalogued. No curse inscription was ever found because it never existed in the first place. So why does the mummy curse still live? Scholars say it survives for 3 reasons. 1, we love stories where science and reason fail. 2, we fear what we do not understand, and ancient cultures seem mysterious. 3, death, especially sudden death, forces us to look for patterns. If someone dies after touching a tomb, superstition becomes easier than accepting coincidence. Human psychology clings to myth when the truth feels boring or random. Now here is the part that rarely gets told. Archaeologists and historians tried to correct the record, but their explanations never traveled as far as the myth itself. Journalists did not want quotes that ruined the drama. They wanted ghost stories. The myth got louder every time someone repeated it at a dinner table, read it in a novel, or saw it in a movie. The truth, meanwhile, sat quietly in academic books, museums, and excavation reports, read by far fewer people. But you are here now, which means you do not settle for easy ghost stories. You want to know how a legend forms and why it spreads. You want to know what was exaggerated and what was real. So here is the real story, once and for all. A few coincidences sparked panic. Sensational journalism dressed it in terror. Ancient beliefs were misunderstood, and a world hungry for mystery poured gasoline on the story. The result was a myth that survived 100 years without a spine to stand on. And that does not mean the real history of Tutankhamun is less dramatic. It might actually be more fascinating. Think about it. A teenage pharaoh buried with unimaginable wealth, forgotten by time, then rediscovered by chance and thrust into global fame. His tomb changed archaeology. It changed how museums operate. It changed how governments protect cultural heritage. It sparked decades of research into mummification, DNA studies, ancient diets, and medical practices. The truth behind the discovery shaped modern history more than any fake curse ever could. Now for the final question, you should ask yourself, if a myth like this could survive for a century with no evidence, how many other ancient legends are made of the same mixture of fear, fantasy, and exaggeration? How many stories from the past are still waiting to be cleared of superstition? The tomb of Tutankhamun is not haunted, but it is powerful. Not because ghosts live there, but because the world once believed they did. That is how myths are born and how they stay alive. They feed on belief, not proof. The mummy curse was never an ancient warning. It was a modern invention dressed up in hieroglyphs and sand. The gods of Egypt never cursed anyone, but a sensational headline can do things even a pharaoh could not. If this made you question what else you have heard about the ancient world, you are exactly the kind of person this channel is made for. There are more stories like this ones that sit between truth and legend, waiting to be untangled. So click subscribe before you go, because the next myth we tear apart might be one you believed your entire life. And remember, curses do not survive 3,000 years, but a good story often does.